So our topic today that Reverend Nadine has provided me with, the opportunity, is test driving the truth. I like that part. Test driving. You know, you can talk about it all you want, and it doesn't matter. We'll just take a car for a fact. You could talk about all the different kind of cars you want, or the different kind of cars you like. And you could look at all the videos, study all the specs, you can Google it, you could do anything, ask Jeeves, all that kind of stuff. You get all the information, all the prices, all the deals, all the financing, but are you going to just go get the car? No. Because before you get the car, you're going to go for a test drive. I remember the last time I had that experience, you know. There was about 10 years ago, and I was going down and I had an idea about a car I was going to get. And the young man that was the salesperson fooled me. Because I had an idea, and I was kind of waffling a bit. He says, well, look, he says, let's go to a new starting place. He said, was there any car that you ever really, really wanted? Well, let's go back to 1965. I wanted a Mustang. But you know, only old guys can afford them. Young guys couldn't unless they mortgaged their soul, so as to speak. And I said, well, yeah, I wanted a Mustang. But he said, no buts. He said, let's start with the Mustang, and then we'll work our way into the other cars. Yeah, well, he said, I said, that's nice. So let's look at it. He said, would you like to take it for a test drive? Yeah, well, you know the rest of the story. I bought the Mustang. And you know, it was wonderful. Because I always wanted it. And so it was only 35 years past the due date. But didn't matter. No, because I had my Mustang and I enjoyed driving down 17th Avenue. Look at all the young girls waving at me. Oh God, it took me back 40 years, you know. It was just great. And it was such a nice car, but after a couple of years, it just wasn't practical because I couldn't even fit a box in the trunk. And I wanted to do some touring, so, you know, I had my experience and then I moved on. But you see, you got to take it for a test drive. You got to try it. All those things that you've been sitting at in the back of your mind, gee, I'd like to. However, we put these things on it someday. Not now, it's always someday. And we got to do our someday habit and change it to do it now. Because if not, we look back and say, gee, I wish I would have. And you know, when I die, I want them to talk at my memorial about, here's a man who never said, I wish I would have. And I go out and I live my life that way. If there's something that comes to me, I look at it. If I want to do it seriously, it's on my list. And if not, it's gone. Unless it keeps coming back and bugging me, then I put it on the list. And then I got the to-do list and just keeps you busy, I'll tell you. I'm looking forward to getting back to work so I can get a bit of a vacation. So test driving the truth. One of the key things is if we're going to test drive the truth, we have to understand law. Now, we work with law all the time, and we have an innate ability to kind of understand from experience how law works. And we tend to want to work on the affirmative side instead of the negative side. Let's take it down into practical, provable stuff. At the end of today's session, we're having a seminar called Flying. We're going to the top of the building and we're going to walk off and test and see how we fly. How many of you are going to come? No charge for this. No. One, yeah. Well, there's always somebody that'll come along. Why don't we? Because we understand the law of gravity. It goes down and fast. And you know, it doesn't matter where I've been, I found that the law of gravity works the same there as it does here. Okay, so we know that. Just like the law of electricity, we know that we can use it and get all the affirmative results from the wonderful use of it. But how many people are going to take a bulb out of a lamp and stick their tongue in? Anybody here? Well, that's the misuse of electricity. So we know that if you use it, it's wonderful. If you misuse it, it's not. By the way, personal experience, 10 years old, I did that, and I can tell you it is quite an experience which I've never repeated. Never had the curiosity to do it again, because once I got off the floor and my poor tongue was and my brain was a little bit foggy, I decided that that wasn't quite an idea to do anymore. Don't ask me why I did it in the first place. I can't give you that answer. So it's law. Okay? Now, why would you be surprised if you went out and planted stinkweed in your garden, that stinkweed come up? You wouldn't be surprised because you knew that that's what you planted. So the context of Test Driving the Truth today, we're going to look in terms of gardening. And one of my favorite authors is a gentleman by the name of Irvin Seal. He's since passed, but I had the experience of meeting with him and dealing with him at the Center for Positive Living in 1983 when I was on the board, and we were doing a ministerial search, and he was one of our mentors and guides. And he's quite an author, and he wrote a book called Learn to Live, which is really taking the parables of Jesus and teaching them in modern day terms that really represent the inner meaning or the mental meaning. And so he talked about this process. And I'd like to read this to you. It's kind of interesting. He said, the judgment time is the harvest time. And the mind reaps the fruits of its constructive attitudes and acknowledges the results of its destructive concepts. What the mind could not refuse as an idea must be now accepted as a fact and an experience and understood. A connection must be made between the experience and the thought. And then the mind comes to judgment and discretion. He said, all real learning must center around the knowledge that there are three parts to the life process: planting, growth, and harvest. So what do we actually know of the growth of the seed in the ground? He said, man deals with planting and harvesting, and man can understand these. The middle part is always a mystery. The farmer plants and the farmer harvests, but God giveth the increases. How the seed which the farmer plants expands from within itself, grows, reaches out, and procures food is not a part of the human knowledge. Between planting and harvesting, there is a mystery. Between every beginning and every ending in any function or process which you choose to mention, the middle portion is not the subject of scientific research or philosophic description. We simply know nothing about it. We have absolutely nothing about the growing of a seed. Nothing. Zero. We are justly proud of man's knowledge, but actually he knows so very little. The philosophy of 6,000 years, says Emerson, has not researched the chambers and magazines of the soul. Man knows how to plant, and he knows how to harvest, but beyond affording the conditions to help it grow better, man does not know how to make a seed grow. Yet, were it not for the seed and the way of the seed in the ground, man would perish before the next harvest. So it's really, really important if we want to advance ourselves and work with this law of sowing and reaping in our life, that we understand what's our job and what's God's job. Now, it's very important to understand the two. Why? Because we need to work diligently and with a lot of conviction and belief at what our part is, the planting and the harvesting. However, we have to leave the growing to the Spirit. Yes, we've got to follow the leads. Yes, we've got to do what is required of us to help facilitate this process. But the how-tos are none of our business. I became aware of this law and really decided to put it to the test about 25 years ago. And so whenever I start on a new endeavor, whatever my aim or goal or what I want to harvest is, and I start with the seed, I have a little game that I play with myself. And the game is, I try to figure out how it's going to happen. Okay? What's going to happen to get me there? Now there's a few things I know I need to do to get me there. But I try to figure out what are those other unknowns. And I got to tell you, after 25 years of consciously doing this, just to see, I am batting 100%. I haven't figured it out yet. Okay? So I have proven to myself that I do not know what is required to fulfill my desire right now. I know what I want. That's my seed. I know what I got to do with it. I know how to get started. And when I get down to the other end, I know what I'm going to jump in and reap. But those how-tos along the way, I don't know what they are. If I try to mess with that and say, well, I got to wait till this happens until I do that, I'm not going anywhere. Because if I wait till this happens to do that, it may not be what I need to do to reach there. I just think that's what I might need to do. But I don't have those answers. That's the Spirit. You know, I've gone through many experiences in my journey in ministry where I've had something laid on my plate and have not known how to deal with the situation. I recall one of my most profound experiences was being called upon to do a memorial for one of my best friend's son who had been murdered here in the city. And I had known the boy 20 years, all his life. And it was one of those very tense situations with a lot of angry people. And people that had the potential to carry that into a different stage of violence if they so choose. And so I was upset. I had my own stuff to deal with. So how do I go from here, which is the idea that I'm going to be in the harvest, which is the officiating of that memorial, and I wanted to bring that to a place where people could walk out feeling that they have had some grief and release. How can I get there from here? What do I do in between? Where do I go to get the information from that? How do I research that? There is no book written about how to do that or what to say. There is only one thing that I could turn to. I had to be real clear what my intention was, the outcome, what the harvest was, or as clear as I could be in that type of situation. I had to know that this is what I was going to do, and I wanted to be of service to facilitate the greatest possible experience and healing for everybody concerned. So I turned to Spirit and I did my what we call spiritual mind treatment, prayer, whatever you want. I'm not looking for something or somebody outside of me to guide me. I'm looking for that inner guidance from that inner part of me that's spiritual. So I opened up to that because that's all I had. And I got little bits and little pieces. And I walked in and did that memorial in the form of a celebration. And at the end of it, I had these big, tough men coming up to me with a tear in their eye, a number of them, shaking my hand, and they saying, "Thank you. I don't know what happened, but I feel okay now," you say. And I knew what happened. I understand the process and that. They don't have to understand it. They had the experience of that. And so that developed that real deep trust inside of me. And the more experiences I had like that, the more trust I had in the principle. But even today, when I embark on something new, I still have that struggle because I want to be in control. If I have so much money in the bank, then I can do it. If I have this, then it's okay. We want these guarantees. Anybody want guarantees before you start? Sure we do. And that's called being a control person. Well, I'm not a control person. Yes, you are, if that's what you're doing. You're setting out controls. You're setting out conditions. You're setting out ideas. Okay? And we have to reel back on that and just be clear on intention and clear on what we're trying to do and step into the experience and do the work and begin to trust. I can be 100% in control of my life. I found the way to do it. I haven't mastered it, but I know how to do it. This is how you do it. When you give up 100% your need to control any outputs, any outcomes, or any actions that you need to move forward with, when you give up that need to have any control over it or any conditions on it, then you become 100% in control of your life. Because then you're operating from a spiritual perspective, and the Spirit never will steer you wrong. It's when we get our, as Emerson calls it, our bloated nothingness in the way that we begin to fail. What we need to know here is the seed is the constant, the soil is the variable. Yeah, the soil or the soul part of us is the variable. It works the same for all of us, but different soils produce different results. I remember 11 years ago, I was over in China for 81 days, northern China, teaching in a institute in northern China. And we went to the vendors on the street and bought watermelon. Great big watermelon like this for 84 cents. And you know, it looked like a regular North American watermelon, but it tasted differently. And you know, it wasn't just this vendor. I like this vendor because this one vendor had was a very peasant family, very nice, respectful, beautiful people. And I had bought some from one of their other competitors right beside them who were not very nice people. And their watermelon tasted different. I thought it was attitude, but it was the soil, you see. The soil that we use will produce different results. Even though you got the same seed, it'll produce different tasting vegetables, different tasting fruits. So what we need to be aware of is we don't control how the soil grows. We don't control any of that, but we can have impact by the nurturing and by what we provide, which is the soil. So we can make variables there, different types of fertilizers, manures, natural stuff, and that'll produce different types of results. So our mind is like that. And one of the greatest stories, I just love this, and it is from the Sermon on the Sea, by the sea. Jesus did that in the whole chapter of chapter 13 of Matthew. He did 9 parables in his teaching. And one of my favorite parables is the parable of the sower. And it goes like this. And he spoke many things unto them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up, because they had no depths of earth. The sun dried them up, and they were scorched. And because they had no roots, they withered away. Some fell amongst the thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. But others fell into the good ground and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30-fold. So he's talking about 4 scenarios here. And you got to remember with the parables, there's the practical, literal part of them that has the truth. And then there's the implied internal meaning, because spiritual principle was taught in the form of parables and tales and stories. So in the old days, they didn't have the equipment we did, so they broadcasted the seeds like this, and they threw them over the ground. The wayside is the part by the road where all the people walk, so it was very hard. And then there's always the stony part of the ground, and then there's a part where a lot of the thorns and the weeds grow if you don't tend to them. And then, of course, there's a right fertile soil. So that's the practical part of a field. Now, the internal part, and what that means to you and me, is these are the 4 types of minds. And we have to be real clear about how we position our mind to make sure ours is fertile. So some seeds fell by the wayside and the fowl come and ate them up. That's the mind that is the unteachable. That's the cynic. That's the pessimist. That's the dogmatist. That's the one that knows that their way is the correct way and anybody else is going to that other place. Okay? We've been doing it this way, and this is something older people get into, not us, but we're doing it this way for 50 years, don't see any need to change. It worked, working now. Anybody ever been like that or worked like anybody like that? So we become unteachable. Just like learning those darn software packages, you know. I read all the instructions and I get to the point, but yet the darn kids do better and they don't read the darn instructions. What's wrong with them? So after consultation with my 13-year-old grandson a couple of years ago, I asked him, how do you do that? Well, he says, you know, he says, Papa, you just work with what you know and then it comes to you. Just like life. It's intuitive. Those kids do it intuitively. So I started doing it intuitively and I advanced my usage of the software applications immensely. Simply because I opened my mind to a different way. Now, had you told me before, I would have said, well, I did say, you're nuts. You can't do that. You got to follow the instructions. So people say, well, how did you do that, Doug? I said, well, I don't know. And I start to do it again, but it's different. It's not the same because it's all intuitive and it works. And sometimes I do something and I have no idea even what I did. I hit the wrong key and it worked. Because something up there knows the wrong key is the right key. I don't. Okay, so we have to keep an open mind. It's like a parachute, folks. It isn't going to do you any good unless it's open. Some fell upon the stony places where they had not much earth and sprung up, and because they didn't have no depth, they were exposed into the sun. And this is some of the enthusiastic minds. People that they latch on to a new idea and it's great and we get going on it and then all of a sudden it doesn't go anywhere. Is anybody like that? You get whipped into a lather in a frenzy and get started on something and then just like the hair, all the natural endowments and everything like that, but blew the race. Okay? So it's good to have that enthusiasm and that energy. However, when that begins to wane, then we have to just pick ourselves up and get back right on track with it and carry it through. But a lot of times we're great starters but poor finishers. And this is not a contradiction, this is just a fact. We all done it. And then some fell amongst the thorns and the thorns sprang up and choked them. Well, you know, you got a nice garden, you've done all the work, you get everything ready, you prepare it, you throw the seeds in, and you don't go out and weed it. What happens? The weeds grow and the seeds grow. You might have 10-foot high pea pods with 2 peas on them, but they're big, right next to the thistle, competing for all that energy. So you see, the real challenge, and this is one that we work with on a day-to-day basis, the real challenge is not having the good ideas and planting them, but it's going about ripping up the roots of our good ideas by allowing the thorns and the weeds to come in. So we need to be a good custodian of our mind. Lots of times I have people come to me, you know, I got this great idea and here's 5 reasons why I can't do it. Well, I said, give me one how you can. Well, I haven't thought about that. Serious, folks, you'd be surprised how often that happens. In a lot of the work I do one-on-one, people got a problem and they're always talking about the problem and I ask, well, what about the solution? Well, I haven't thought about that. Okay? So the mind becomes overwhelmed and overburdened with all these unnecessary parts. All of this negativity, all of this doubt, all of this fear, all of this, I can't do this. And it depends on which way we sway, what kind of results we're going to get. So we got to get in there and pluck the dirt out, pluck the weeds out. And you know, don't matter how good you do at that, they still come up. Where do they come from? And then one of the things that happens to us is when they come up again, we say, oh, I thought I dealt with that, and here it is, and we get depressed and give up. Has anybody ever had that happen before? Sure. Well, we don't know where they come from, but they're there, right? We don't know where the weeds come from, but they make it. We just got to deal from it. Just like, well, I thought I dealt with this, but here it is again. Well, it kind of works like that. And then over a period of time, it becomes less and less, and the goodness becomes more and more. But it requires us to tend the garden of our mind very astutely and wisely. And then others fell into the fertile ground and brought forth fruit. All kinds of it. An abundance. But you can't be guaranteed how much fruit you're going to get from every experience. You could be just like Johnny Appleseed, eh? You could run across the country planting all kinds of apple seeds. Now, here's a little bit of a quiz. Everybody here's cut an apple in half, and you know every apple has some seeds in it. Anybody ever count the seeds in an apple? Well, do it and see. You'll find that there's usually more than 2 and usually less than 10. Is that about right? I haven't found any with none or 1, and I haven't found any with 15, but I've usually found, 5, 6, 7, there's a bunch of seeds, but we could predict that. So we know how many seeds approximately there are in an apple. The question remains, do we know how many apples there are in a seed? No, it could be millions. We don't know how many apples can grow from that one seed. 10 years ago, 9 years ago, Anna and I set out a 10-year travel plan. So our commitment was to have one major travel experience every year. And that was the seed that we planted. And lo and behold, by ways and means and things like that, everything the plan that we've done. However, because that was our intention to do this, and to travel and to enrich our lives by experience, that was the seed that we planted. But the apples were incredible, because not only did we get to have that experience every year we've had a multitude of other different travel experiences that just kind of come along that we never thought about. And so what's our job? Our job is to go there and reap it. You see? And there are 3 cardinal rules that I always work with people when you're dealing with any type of goal or desire or experience. And the 3 rules that I work with, that we work with, and that I teach people constantly is you've got to do it with these 3 things in mind. One is, in the whole journey, there is no blaming. No blaming. Not even, you don't even get to blame yourself. No blaming at all. Because that's putting it outside. That's passing the buck. It's just the way it is. Deal with it. No justifying. You don't have to justify what you're doing or why you're doing it if you've got your reason and you're clear. It's extremely difficult to justify anything. And why do you need to do it? You don't. And the most important of the 3 is no attachment to the outcome. You don't want to get attached to exactly how it has to be. Yes, it's good to be definite about where you're going and what you're doing, but that attachment to how it has to be removed, because the attachment can be a limitation or a restriction. I always do it this or better, and I never got this. Never been what I thought it would be. It's always been better. And things have happened that I couldn't imagine would possibly happen. So it's this or better. And no attachment, because it could be a limitation. I always tell the story about my going to Hawaii. 5 years I want to go to Hawaii. I'm going soon as I get the money. Does it make sense? Money was the limitation, because I was saying I had to have money to go. You don't need money to go to Hawaii. When I come to that, I thought, okay, let's work with that. Because I've been working with it for 5 years and I didn't get the money. Work with it. 6 months after I started working with it, I'm just going to Hawaii. Because I thought, well, you know, maybe somebody will take me, or maybe I'll win a trip, or who knows what could happen, right? 6 months after I did that, I got a call from my friend who was a minister in Honolulu, and she said to me, Doug, I've been hearing you've been doing this strategic planning process. Would you have some time to come over and do it with our board? I said, I think I could fit it in. She said, well, would you do a Sunday service and a lesson while you're here, a class? Oh, I think I could stretch it out a little bit more. She said, well, I hate to ask you this, but you know, we got a new church over in the big island of Hilo. Would you be willing to stay a little longer and go over there and do that with them? I said, I think I can. So I went there and come back, and after I tallied it up, paid my expenses, I had about $1,500 US left over. Now, do you think for 1 minute I ever thought that I would get paid to go to Hawaii? If somebody would have told me that, I would have said something that I don't want to say right now. Okay? Dealing with, are you nuts? But, you know, just to be real clear, it didn't happen once, it happened twice. So I have never paid to go to Hawaii, and I've never had money to go to Hawaii. Don't you feel sorry for me? No, I know you don't. Okay? Principle works. And that's the key. You got to take off the conditions of what it's going to be. I know goal setting tells you to be specific. Be specific, but don't limit. Don't put restrictions on there. I'll do this when. Once I have this amount of money, then I'll feel comfortable to do that. Okay? Don't look for guarantees, because you're not going to get them. You won't get any guarantees, but the universe will always be there for you and not against you. So that's the parable of the sower and the seed. And Irvin Seal, he says that the parable shows us that different kinds of soil make different responses to the same seed in order to show us that the different kinds of minds respond differently to truth. If the seed is the same, but the soils are different, you'll get varying yields and quality of products in accordance to the quality of the soil. Certain soils allow the seeds to express its potentialities more fully than others. So a real good example of this, we all talk about wine. Wine growing responds to climate, and it responds to the soil quite significantly and quite different. We were touring Italy there a couple of years ago and partaking of the wine, and it was grown in different areas, distinctly different taste, not because of the process of making wine as much as the soil and the climatic conditions that were available. So our life is like that. Our life is there sitting for us, and the soil works the same, just like the soil in everybody's yard works the same. But our output or our harvest will be different based on our ability to be able to work with the variability of the soil. The soil works the same. We can't change that. We don't know how it works. But we can change the types and the way we nurture it and what we do along the way to bring that plant to the full fruition. And the difference here between, and I got to be real clear about this, the difference here between planting a radish in the spring and knowing it's going to be up in 9 to 10 weeks and planting a seed in your life is that in your life you have no idea how long it will take until that seed grows into fruition. In the past 10 years, I have experienced many different things where I put the seed into place and the desire when I was 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. And it never happened. I put the stang in 65, it didn't happen till 2000. 35 years later, somebody could say, oh, you know, isn't that depressing? No. It's really actually quite satisfying to know it doesn't really matter when it happens. It's not important. You think it's better to happen now or later. You think that your time is the right time to have it, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that you do have the experience and you do have the opportunity. Doesn't matter when it is. So it's called reaping the gems along the way from the seeds you've sown in the past. And the more you can work with that and the more you could trust in that process, the greater the experience that you're going to have. One of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to have a lot of grandchildren and be a good grandparent. And I've had wonderful opportunities. We got 9 grandchildren, and I spend a lot of time out in the mountains or different experiences. We call it Papa's Day Camp. Until they get to be teens, and it's Papa's Expo because they don't do day camp anymore. That's what I've been told, so I had to adjust my thinking. So we go for Papa's Day Camp, and Anna and I organize it, but that's just what we call it. And take the kids out and have the experience. And you know, yeah, it's about them having that experience, but it's more than that. It's about me having the experience. It's my experience, actually, folks. I'm very selfish about it, and I enjoy it. Okay? And the kids do, too. And that's the nice part about it. So remember, work with that soil in your mind. It's creative. You don't have to question it. Don't get involved in doing God's job, because it'll make you miserable. And you can't do it anyhow. That's God's job. Our job is to set the destination, the idea, work with the seed, and then nurture the soil as it comes along, and step up and do what we need to do. And remember, avoid that pitfall. The greatest pitfall people have is when things start happening and they say, I'm not ready yet. Does anybody say, I'm not ready? And they say, Reverend Doug, could you tell me when I'm ready for this? When's a good time to start? I said, well, is it happening? Yeah, well, now is the time. But. Now is the time. That's because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be happening, you see. So we ought to get up and get off our yeah buts and just do it, because that's the cure. Well, what if I make a mistake? Well, haven't you made mistakes before? What if I do it wrong? Haven't you done it wrong before? What if you don't make any mistakes? Haven't you done that before? What if you do it right? Haven't you done that before? Sure, it all works out. So for you and for me today, I know that there's a greater understanding and appreciation of the law of mind and how it works. So let's get out there and let's test drive the truth. It is practical, provable. Don't believe me. Use it and prove it to yourself. And the enrichment that comes will enrich the soul. And that's what you get to take with you when you leave this part. And so let's go forward knowing that goodness is ours, greatness is ours, the truth is here, and we use it and we accept the results, and so it is. And so it is. Yeehaw!